The champagne flute felt heavier than it should have, a crystal burden in my hand as I stood in the shadowed corner of the corporate ballroom. The air, thick with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of self-congratulatory chatter, felt suffocating. My gaze was fixed on the illuminated stage, where my ex-fiancé Marcus Thorne basked in the spotlight, accepting his promotion to senior vice president. A wave of bitter irony washed over me. Here he was, celebrating his ascent at Pinnacle Marketing, a titan in the industry, while I, Cassandra Vance, pretended to sip Dom Pérignon, a bottle I'd purchased with the hard-won profits from my own burgeoning company. His words from 6 months ago, delivered with a chilling certainty, still echoed in the cavernous chambers of my mind. "You'll never amount to anything without me, Cassandra. You don't have what it takes to run a real business." The memory was a cold, sharp shard, yet tonight it fueled a quiet, simmering defiance. He had been so utterly convinced of my inevitable failure, so dismissive of my ambition, that he'd even offered to take me back once I came to my senses. Now, watching him soak in the applause from colleagues oblivious to the true Marcus, a slow, knowing smile touched my lips. He had no idea that the woman he'd discarded as merely playing entrepreneur now commanded Digital Dynamo, a marketing agency that had, in a whisper of strategic brilliance, quietly become Pinnacle Marketing's most formidable and unexpected threat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hum of the ballroom, a symphony of success and self-importance, vibrated through the floor and up into the soles of my designer heels. Each note seemed to underscore Marcus's triumph, a narrative he had meticulously crafted and believed with an almost religious fervor. He had always been a master of appearances, a chameleon of charisma, capable of charming boardrooms and silencing dissent with equal ease. Our 3-year relationship had been a slow, insidious unraveling of that illusion, a gradual peeling back of layers to reveal the insecure, manipulative core beneath. I had mistaken his condescension for confidence, his control for care. The red flags, in retrospect, had been enormous, flapping wildly in the wind, but love, or what I thought was love, had blinded me. When he'd walked out, taking his meticulously tailored suits, and leaving behind a void that felt both crushing and, paradoxically, liberating, his parting words had been a final, calculated blow, designed to shatter any lingering self-belief. "You're too emotional, Cassandra, too naive for the cutthroat world of business. Stick to your little hobbies, that's all you're good for." For weeks, those words had been a relentless tormentor, whispering doubts into my ear as I navigated the treacherous waters of launching Digital Dynamo. There were nights I'd stared at the ceiling, the weight of his dismissal pressing down on me, wondering if he was right. Was I truly destined for failure without his guidance, his connections, his superior business acumen? But then a stubborn ember of defiance, long suppressed by his overbearing presence, began to glow. It wasn't just about proving him wrong, it was about proving myself right. About validating the vision I had for a marketing agency built on genuine creativity, transparent ethics, and a deep understanding of digital landscapes, principles Marcus had scoffed at as idealistic and unprofitable. Digital Dynamo had been born from that defiance, a phoenix rising from the ashes of a broken engagement. We started small, just me and a handful of incredibly talented, equally disillusioned creatives. We worked out of a cramped co-working space, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in our mission. Our early victories were hard-won, celebrated with pizza and late-night brainstorming sessions. But slowly, steadily, we began to gain traction. Our campaigns, unburdened by corporate bureaucracy or Marcus's outdated strategies, were fresh, innovative, and, most importantly, effective. We didn't just meet client expectations, we shattered them. And as our reputation grew, so did our client roster, attracting businesses that sought genuine partnership over corporate pretense. Tonight, at Pinnacle's annual gala, was my first public appearance since the breakup. I had debated whether to come, the thought of facing Marcus a knot in my stomach. But then, a stronger urge had taken hold. The desire to stand tall. Not as his discarded fiancé, but as a successful entrepreneur in my own right. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was validation. And as I watched him accept his accolades, the applause washing over him like a warm tide, I felt a quiet satisfaction bloom within me. He had no idea how profoundly he had underestimated me, how his cruel words had inadvertently forged the very strength he believed I lacked. "Cassandra Vance, is that truly you?" A familiar voice, smooth and authoritative, cut through my reverie. I turned, my smile widening genuinely as I recognized Victoria Chen, Marcus's direct supervisor and Pinnacle's formidable chief marketing officer. Her presence at this high-profile company party was expected, but her approaching me, her gaze sharp with recognition, was a pleasant surprise. Victoria was a legend in the industry, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach. I had always admired her from afar, a beacon of female leadership in a male-dominated world. "Victoria," I replied, extending my hand, the champagne flute momentarily forgotten. Her grip was firm, confident. "It's wonderful to see you. Congratulations on Pinnacle's quarterly numbers. I've been following your performance closely." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a hint of intrigue flickering in her eyes. "You have. And you are." The question hung in the air, a silent invitation for elaboration. Marcus had always been meticulous about compartmentalizing his professional and personal lives. To his colleagues, I was simply another face in the vast sea of networking attendees, a ghost from a past he'd meticulously erased. He'd never mentioned our engagement, let alone its dramatic implosion. This anonymity, I realized, was a powerful advantage. It allowed me to operate outside his carefully constructed narrative, to present myself on my own terms. The ballroom around us continued its vibrant hum, a backdrop to this unexpected pivotal encounter. Marcus, still holding court across the room, remained blissfully unaware, lost in his own self-congratulatory bubble. He was the king of his castle, oblivious to the quiet revolution brewing just beyond his sight. And I, the woman he'd dismissed, was about to introduce him to a new reality. The moment was ripe, pregnant with possibility, and I felt a surge of adrenaline, a delicious thrill of anticipation. This wasn't just about business. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about rewriting the ending Marcus had so confidently penned for me. "I run Digital Dynamo," I stated simply, watching Victoria's expression shift from polite interest to sharp, almost predatory attention. The name, spoken aloud in this corporate stronghold, felt like a declaration, a quiet thunderclap in the midst of their orchestrated calm. Her eyes, which had been merely curious, now narrowed, assessing, calculating. The transformation was subtle but profound, like a predator spotting its prey, or perhaps a fellow apex hunter recognizing a worthy rival. "The agency that landed the Morrison Industries account last month?" Victoria's tone had changed completely, losing its social veneer, gaining an edge of professional curiosity. It was no longer a question but a statement, laced with a hint of surprise and, dare I say, admiration. Morrison Industries was a coveted account, one that Pinnacle had aggressively pursued for months. My agency, a relative newcomer, had snatched it from under their very noses. I nodded, a small, confident tilt of my head. The one that pulled off that viral campaign for Chen Electronics, too. The mention of Chen Electronics, another high-profile victory, seemed to make her lean in closer, her gaze intensifying. Marcus, still holding court across the room, remained blissfully unaware of the conversation unfolding just meters away. A conversation that was, effectively, dismantling the very foundations of his perceived invincibility. He was too engrossed in his own narrative, too consumed by the applause, to notice the quiet storm brewing. "Impressive work, Cassandra," Victoria continued, her voice a low, thoughtful hum. "Though I have to ask, how did a startup manage to outbid us for Morrison? That was supposed to be our account." The question was loaded, brimming with professional curiosity, a touch of frustration, and perhaps a genuine desire to understand. Victoria was not one to shy away from acknowledging competition, especially when that competition proved superior. She was a strategist, and she recognized a formidable one when she saw it. I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. I had won the Morrison account by proposing exactly what Marcus had dismissed as too innovative, too risky, and unproven, when I'd suggested it to him months earlier, back when I was still trying to contribute to his career. His rejection of my ideas, his constant belittling of my insights, had been the final definitive straw in our relationship. It wasn't just personal, it was professional. He didn't just dismiss me, he dismissed my potential, my vision, my very capacity for independent thought. Sometimes, fresh perspectives yield better results, I replied diplomatically, choosing my words carefully. Established agencies can become set in their ways, resistant to true innovation. It was a polite jab, subtle enough not to be overtly aggressive, yet pointed enough to convey the underlying truth. Victoria, a seasoned veteran of the industry, understood the unspoken critique. She knew the inertia that could grip large, successful corporations, the complacency that often bred stagnation. Victoria laughed, a clear, resonant sound that cut through the ballroom's ambient noise, drawing a few curious glances. Diplomatic, I like that. She paused, her gaze studying my face, her eyes piercing, as if trying to read the unwritten chapters of my story. You know, I've been looking for someone with your track record. Would you be interested in discussing some opportunities? Before I could respond, a shadow fell over us. Marcus, his face flushed with champagne and an almost comical self-importance, appeared at Victoria's elbow. Victoria, I was just telling the Morrison team about our strategy for... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes, previously glazed with self-satisfaction, suddenly locking onto mine. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, a sudden, jarring impact that visibly knocked the wind out of his sails. His confident smile faltered, replaced by something between shock and stark, unadulterated panic. For a fleeting moment, the successful executive facade cracked, revealing the insecure, petty man I had once known, the man who had always feared being overshadowed, being exposed as less than he pretended to be. Marcus, I said evenly, my voice calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in his eyes. I raised my glass in a mock toast, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture of triumph. Congratulations on your promotion, well-deserved, I'm sure. The words, seemingly innocuous, were laced with a double meaning, a quiet mockery that only he would understand. Cassandra, he managed, his voice tight, strained as if he were struggling to breathe. What are you doing here? Networking, I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, a smile that held 1,000 unspoken truths. Victoria and I were just discussing business opportunities. I gestured vaguely between us, emphasizing the professional nature of our interaction, a nature that clearly terrified him. Victoria looked between us with growing interest, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. You two know each other? We're acquainted, Marcus said quickly, too quickly, shooting me a warning look, a desperate plea for silence. He was terrified, utterly terrified, that I would mention our past relationship, potentially damaging his meticulously crafted professional image, his carefully constructed narrative of success and detachment. His entire career was built on an edifice of control and perception, and I, his discarded past, was a wrecking ball poised to strike. He had always been so careful, so guarded, so fearful of any vulnerability that could be exploited. And now, here I was, his greatest vulnerability, standing right in front of his boss. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus's desperate plea hung unspoken between us, a silent acknowledgement of the power dynamic that had so completely reversed. He, the man who had once dictated my worth, was now at my mercy, his carefully constructed world teetering on the brink. The irony was a bitter yet satisfying taste on my tongue. He had always believed that success was about who you knew, who you could manipulate, whose ideas you could steal. He had dismissed my belief in talent, vision, and integrity as naive idealism. But here I stood, a testament to those very principles, and he, the architect of his own downfall, could only watch, helpless. Cassandra runs Digital Dynamo, Victoria explained to Marcus, her voice carrying a subtle note of satisfaction, as if she were enjoying the unfolding drama. The agency that won the Morrison account. I watched the color drain from Marcus's face as the pieces clicked together. The Morrison account, the one he had been so certain Pinnacle would secure, the one he had dismissed my ideas for, had been snatched away by my company. He had been so dismissive of my business, so convinced of its insignificance, that he had never even bothered to learn its name. To him, it had been a cute hobby, a fleeting distraction, certainly not a legitimate threat to his empire. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, a stunning, public humiliation. "Small world," Marcus said weakly, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes darting around, as if searching for an escape route, a hole to crawl into. "Indeed," I agreed, my smile widening, genuinely enjoying his profound discomfort. Victoria was just mentioning some potential opportunities. I'd love to hear more about Pinnacle's current challenges. The words were a subtle twist of the knife, a direct challenge to his authority, to his perceived control over Pinnacle's future. Victoria's eyes lit up with possibility, a clear indication that she was seriously considering my involvement, while Marcus looked ready to vomit, his face a sickly shade of green. "Why don't we schedule a proper meeting?" Victoria suggested, her gaze fixed on me, ignoring Marcus's palpable distress. "I have some projects that might benefit from your fresh perspective." "I'd be delighted," I said, pulling out my business card, the one with the sleek, modern Digital Dynamo logo. A logo Marcus had once mocked as amateurish and unprofessional. "I'm always interested in new challenges." As Victoria examined my card, Marcus finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled sound. "Victoria, I'm not sure this is." "Marcus," Victoria interrupted, her tone carrying the unmistakable weight of authority, a subtle but unmistakable rebuke. "I think I can handle my own business decisions." Marcus's face reddened as he realized he'd overstepped, trying to interfere with his boss's networking. In his panic about my presence, he'd forgotten basic corporate hierarchy, the very rules he usually enforced with ruthless efficiency. "Of course," he backtracked quickly, his voice laced with forced deference. "I just meant that our current team is quite capable of." "I'm sure they are," Victoria said dismissively, then turned back to me, her smile warm and inviting. "Cassandra, are you free for lunch tomorrow? I'd like to discuss this properly." "Absolutely," I replied, watching Marcus's jaw clench, a muscle twitching uncontrollably. "I'll have my assistant call your office." Victoria smiled, handed me her card, and with a final, confident nod, walked away. "Excellent. I look forward to it." As she disappeared into the crowd, Marcus and I were left facing each other across the invisible chasm that had opened between us 6 months ago. The ballroom continued its celebration around us, a vibrant, oblivious backdrop to our silent standoff. But we might as well have been alone, isolated in a bubble of unspoken history and simmering resentment. "What game are you playing, Cassandra?" Marcus hissed under his breath, his eyes darting around, checking if anyone was watching us, if his carefully constructed facade was holding. "No game," I replied calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the triumph bubbling within me. "Just business. You know, that thing you said I'd never understand." The barb landed, precise and sharp, hitting its mark. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of pure hatred in their depths. "You can't seriously be considering working with Pinnacle. After everything." "After everything? What, Marcus?" I kept my voice low but couldn't hide the steel in it. "After you told me I was wasting my time? After you said I should focus on supporting your career instead of building my own?" I paused, letting the words hang in the air, a litany of his past dismissals. "That's not what I meant. And you know it. Don't I?" I took a slow sip of champagne, noting how his confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate, almost pathetic vulnerability. "Because I distinctly remember you saying that successful women were threatening to men, and that I should be happy being the supportive girlfriend. Tell me, how's that working out for you now?" I gestured subtly towards the executive table, where Victoria was now deep in conversation with the CEO, a powerful woman who clearly commanded respect, not just from her male colleagues, but from the entire industry. Marcus glanced towards them, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Cassandra, please, don't do this." "Do what? Accept a legitimate business opportunity? Why would that concern you?" I leaned closer, desperation creeping into his voice. "Because you know things about me, about my work." "You could what?" I challenged, my gaze unwavering. "Tell them about your real opinions on workplace diversity, about how you take credit for your team's ideas, about the corners you cut on the Chen Electronics pitch." Each accusation hit its mark, a direct hit to his carefully guarded secrets. Marcus had always been careless with his words around me, treating me like a personal diary, a confidant he could vent to without consequences. He'd complained about Victoria's aggressive leadership style, mocked the company's diversity initiatives, and bragged about manipulating client presentations to inflate his own achievements. "That was private," he whispered urgently, his face pale. "Was it?" I smiled, enjoying the power dynamic that had so completely reversed. "Because I don't recall signing any confidentiality agreements." I paused, letting him squirm, letting the full weight of his vulnerability press down on him. "But don't worry, Marcus. I'm far too professional to let personal history interfere with business opportunities." The relief that flashed across his face was almost pitiful. He actually believed I'd protect him, that I'd be the bigger person, that my ethics would shield him from his own misdeeds. "However," I continued, watching hope die in his eyes, replaced by a dawning terror, "I can't control what naturally comes up in the course of working with your team. Strategic discussions, creative reviews, that sort of thing." Marcus's face had gone completely pale, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He understood the implications perfectly. If I became Pinnacle's external consultant, I'd have access to his projects, his team, his methods. Every shortcut he'd taken, every idea he'd stolen, every lie he'd told would be exposed under professional scrutiny. It wouldn't be me exposing him directly, but his own actions under my watchful eye would inevitably reveal themselves. "Cassandra, we need to talk privately," he said, gripping my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. I looked down at his hand until he released me, my gaze cold and unwavering. "We have nothing to discuss privately, Marcus. We're colleagues now. Everything should be handled through proper channels." The word "colleagues" landed like a slap, a brutal reminder of his diminished status. In his mind, I was still the girlfriend he'd discarded, not a peer who could threaten his entire career. The reality that I'd built something substantial, something formidable, without him, was clearly still processing, a bitter pill he was forced to swallow. The CEO's voice boomed through the speakers, pulling the attention of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's celebration, I want to share some exciting news about Pinnacle's future direction." The room quieted as attention turned to the stage. Marcus and I stood frozen in our standoff, both waiting to hear what would be announced. As you know, the marketing landscape is evolving rapidly. To stay competitive, we're expanding our digital capabilities and exploring new strategic partnerships. The CEO paused for effect, building suspense. Victoria Chen will be leading this initiative, with full authority to bring in the best talent and resources available. Applause filled the room, but I was watching Marcus's face crumble. Victoria had just been given carte blanche to reshape his department, and he knew exactly what that meant for someone like me. Victoria caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass in my direction, a subtle but unmistakable gesture, a promise of things to come. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said softly, finishing my champagne, the last drop a symbol of our finality. "Looks like you're going to have an interesting few months ahead." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Cassandra, wait!" The desperation was naked now, all pretense abandoned, his voice raw with fear. "What do you want?" I looked back at him, at the man who had once made me question my own worth, who had convinced me that my dreams were too small and my ambitions too naive. Standing there in his expensive suit, at his promotion party, he looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by his own hubris. "I want exactly what you said I'd never have," I replied, letting the words sink in. Success, recognition, the respect of my peers, and apparently, I'm about to get all three. As I walked away, I heard him call my name one more time, a desperate, fading cry, but I didn't turn around. The evening had exceeded every expectation I'd harbored when I'd accepted the invitation to this industry networking event. Outside the ballroom, the cool evening air was a welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the party. I checked my phone and found 3 missed calls from my assistant, Jamie. The urgency seemed unusual for a Friday evening, so I stepped into the hotel lobby, seeking a quiet corner to call back. Cassandra! Thank God! Jamie's voice was breathless with excitement, a stark contrast to her usual calm demeanor. You're not going to believe what just happened. Try me, I said, still riding the high from my encounter with Victoria and Marcus. Pinnacle Marketing just called, not through normal channels. Someone from the CMO's office called directly. They want to schedule an emergency consultation for Monday morning. Something about a crisis with their biggest client. I processed this information, my mind already racing, connecting the dots. I glanced through the ballroom's glass doors. Marcus was in animated conversation with several colleagues, his body language screaming damage control, his earlier celebratory demeanor replaced by frantic gestures. Did they specify which client? I asked, though I was already forming suspicions, a chilling premonition of the answer. The pieces were falling into place, a meticulously crafted puzzle of karma. Morrison Industries, Jamie confirmed, her voice still buzzing with disbelief. Apparently there's been some kind of dissatisfaction with the current campaign direction. The pieces clicked into place, perfectly, beautifully. Morrison Industries. The account I'd won months ago, the one Marcus's team had been so certain they'd secured, so confident that they'd apparently made promises they couldn't keep. They'd underestimated me then, and now, their arrogance was catching up to them. Schedule it, I said, watching Marcus gesticulate frantically at what appeared to be an increasingly concerned group of executives. First thing Monday morning. Already done, Jamie chirped. Oh, and Cassandra, the person who called, specifically requested that you handle it personally. Said they'd heard about your innovative approach and wanted the best. I ended the call and stood in the lobby for a moment, processing the evening's developments. In the span of 2 hours, I'd gone from being Marcus's discarded ex-girlfriend to potentially becoming his professional superior, the very person he would have to rely on to clean up his mess. The irony was so perfect, so exquisitely precise, it felt scripted. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Victoria. Looking forward to our lunch tomorrow, and thank you for such an enlightening conversation tonight. Another message followed immediately. P.S. My office will be calling about a Monday morning situation. Hope you're free. I smiled, typing back, always available for the right opportunity. Through the ballroom doors, I could see Marcus scanning the crowd, probably looking for me. His celebration transformed into a crisis management session. The night was still young for him, filled with damage control and desperate calculations, but my evening was just beginning. I had calls to make, strategies to plan, and a business to prepare for what promised to be its biggest opportunity yet. As I walked toward the exit, I thought about Marcus's parting question. What do you want? The answer, I realized, was simple, yet profound. I wanted him to understand that success wasn't about who you knew or who you could manipulate. It was about talent, vision, and the courage to bet on yourself when everyone else, especially Marcus, said you'd fail. By Monday morning, he was going to learn that lesson firsthand. I stepped into the cool evening air, already planning my next moves. The weekend would be spent preparing for what could be the most important week of my professional life. Victoria Chen didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the catalyst for everything Marcus had said I could never achieve. The irony was delicious. He'd spent years undermining my confidence, chipping away at my self-worth, while I'd quietly built something that could now threaten everything he'd worked for. And the best part? He'd handed me the weapons to do it, by dismissing me so completely that he'd never bothered to actually understand what I was building, what I was capable of. As my car pulled away from the hotel, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom through the windows. Marcus was no longer celebrating. He was calculating, probably trying to figure out how to minimize the damage from what was clearly about to become his worst nightmare. Too late, I thought. The pieces were already in motion. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. The stage was set, the players in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama Marcus Thorne would never forget. The quiet, simmering defiance I had felt earlier had now solidified into a calm, resolute determination. I was ready. The drive home was a blur of strategic planning. My mind, usually a whirlwind of creative ideas, was now a finely tuned machine, dissecting every detail of the Morrison Industries account, anticipating every possible move Marcus might make. I mentally reviewed the initial pitch, the innovative concepts he'd dismissed, the very ideas that had ultimately won me the contract. His arrogance had been his greatest weakness, his inability to see beyond his own limited, conventional thinking. He had been so focused on maintaining the status quo, on clinging to outdated methods, that he had become blind to the very evolution of the industry he claimed to lead. And now that blindness was about to cost him everything. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment building. The silence of the space, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the ballroom. As I rode the elevator up to my penthouse, I thought about Jamie, my intern. She was bright, ambitious, and possessed a keen intuition for the digital landscape. Unlike Marcus, I believed in nurturing talent, in empowering my team, regardless of their experience level. Jamie, despite being an intern, was already an invaluable asset to Digital Dynamo, her fresh perspective and eagerness to learn a constant source of inspiration. Marcus, I knew, would have dismissed her as just another cog in the machine, another disposable resource. He wouldn't have seen her potential, her drive, her quiet brilliance. This thought, this stark contrast between our leadership philosophies, brought a subtle, almost mischievous smile to my lips. It was a small detail, perhaps, but it was emblematic of the fundamental difference between us, a difference that would soon manifest on a much larger, more public scale. The idea of Marcus, the arrogant, self-important executive, ever being in a position where he would have to acknowledge, let alone work for, someone like Jamie, was almost too delicious to contemplate. It was a fantasy, of course, a fleeting thought born of the night's events, but it was a fantasy that held a certain poetic justice. Little did I know how prophetic that fleeting thought would become. The stage was set, not just for my triumph, but for a complete reversal of fortunes, a twist of fate that would redefine success and failure in the most unexpected ways. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I'd built Digital Dynamo around. There was a particular satisfaction in that stark contrast, the disciplined precision of my own company versus the chaotic energy I knew was brewing at Pinnacle. The frantic call from Jamie on Friday night had set the tone for a weekend of intense, focused preparation. While Marcus Thorne was undoubtedly spiraling into a maelstrom of panic and damage control, I was meticulously assembling the pieces of his undoing. I had spent Saturday holed up in my office, a space that, unlike Marcus's grand executive suite, prioritized function and collaboration over ostentatious display. My research team, fueled by a relentless drive and an almost conspiratorial excitement, had worked through the weekend, compiling intelligence that would have impressed a corporate spy. They delved deep into Pinnacle's recent campaigns, client satisfaction reports, and, most crucially, the intricate history of their relationship with Morrison Industries. The irony was not lost on me. Morrison Industries had originally been Pinnacle's account to lose, and lose it they had, spectacularly, when they'd brought me in 6 months ago to fix the mess. Morrison's CEO, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Thompson, had been brutally honest about why they'd initially pivoted away from Pinnacle. They promised innovation and delivered recycled campaigns from 5 years ago, he'd told me during our first meeting, his voice tinged with weary disappointment. He spoke of Marcus's team as being stagnant, complacent, and overly reliant on past glories. Now, according to Jamie's follow-up calls and the preliminary legal documents she'd managed to secure, Morrison was not just dissatisfied. They were threatening to terminate all their existing relationships with Pinnacle, unless a resolution was found immediately. It appeared Marcus's team had been so confident in their perceived dominion over Morrison that they'd made promises they couldn't keep. Promises that were now unraveling in spectacular fashion. My research team's deeper dive revealed an unsettling undercurrent. Marcus's team, desperate to win back the Morrison account, had reportedly been secretly working with Morrison's board members, attempting to undermine my thriving campaign and win back the account through backdoor politics. This was not just incompetence. This was unethical, potentially illegal. It solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about proving Marcus wrong. It was about protecting my client and upholding the very integrity he scoffed at. By Sunday evening, I had a comprehensive understanding of Pinnacle's missteps, Marcus's alleged interference, and Morrison's justifiable outrage. I also had a clear strategy. This wasn't merely a consultation. It was an intervention. I wasn't just fixing a problem. I was exposing a systemic rot. I spent the last few hours before bed visualizing the impending confrontation, playing out various scenarios in my mind, anticipating Marcus's reactions, and rehearsing my calm, assertive responses. Sleep came easily, a testament to my preparedness rather than any lack of trepidation. Monday morning dawned, sharp and clear. I arrived at Digital Dynamo's office by 6 a.m., dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without aggression, a deliberate contrast to Marcus's flashy, often over-the-top attire. My team was already buzzing, their faces alight with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Jamie, ever the eager beaver, was practically vibrating with anticipation. I briefed them one last time, emphasizing the need for absolute discretion and professionalism. This was a sensitive situation, and any misstep could jeopardize not only Pinnacle's future, but also Digital Dynamo's reputation. "Elena!" Jamie burst into my office without knocking, clutching her tablet like a lifeline, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and barely contained excitement. I had specifically chosen to keep Marcus's name out of our daily office conversations, referring to him only as the former account lead, or the individual in question, allowing Jamie and the team to focus purely on the business aspects. Her use of my old character name, Elena, was a fleeting slip, a testament to the raw emotion of the moment. Morrison's legal team just sent over the documentation. "You need to see this." I accepted the tablet, my gaze scanning through what appeared to be a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Pinnacle Marketing. The accusations were damning: corporate espionage, breach of contract, and intentional interference with existing business relationships. My suspicions, cultivated over the weekend, were confirmed with chilling clarity. This wasn't just about a mishandled account, it was about criminal misconduct. "When did this land?" I asked, noting the timestamp, 20 minutes ago. The timing was impeccable, a strategic move by Morrison's legal team, designed to land just before the scheduled meeting, to amplify the pressure. "Morrison copied us because they want our input on their response strategy," Jamie explained, her excitement barely contained, her words tumbling out. "Cassandra, they're asking us to help them build a case against Pinnacle." This was better than I dared hope. Not only had Marcus's team mishandled their original relationship with Morrison, jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar contract, but they had apparently committed actionable offenses trying to win it back. This wasn't just a business opportunity. It was a chance to bring accountability to a system that had long rewarded deceit. My phone rang, a direct line from Victoria Chen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation. "Cassandra, thank you for taking this so early." Victoria's voice was strained, lacking the usual confidence that always imbued her words. The tension was palpable even through the phone line. "I assume you've heard about the Morrison situation?" "I have," I replied carefully, my voice calm, controlled. Though I should mention that Morrison's legal team has been in contact with my office as well. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds, heavy with unspoken implications. Victoria, I knew, was processing the significance of that statement. It meant I wasn't just an external consultant. I was already involved, already privy to the depth of Pinnacle's predicament, and potentially already aligned with their adversary. "In what capacity?" she finally asked, her voice tight, a hint of desperation seeping through. They've asked for my professional opinion on certain irregularities they've discovered in their recent dealings with Pinnacle. Another pause. The weight of the moment, the strategic dance between us, was immense. "I see," Victoria said slowly. "Cassandra, I need to ask this directly. Are you planning to work with Morrison against us?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. Victoria was smart enough to understand that my answer could determine whether this conversation ended in partnership or outright warfare. She was testing me, assessing my allegiance, trying to gauge the depth of my involvement. "That depends," I said, watching Jamie's eyes widen at my boldness, her silent reaction a mirror to my own internal satisfaction, "on whether Pinnacle is interested in addressing these irregularities constructively or defensively." "What does that mean?" Victoria asked, her voice betraying a hint of impatience, a flicker of her usual authoritative demeanor trying to reassert itself. "It means Morrison has evidence of some very questionable tactics being employed by your senior staff," I explained, choosing my words precisely. "The question is whether you want to handle this internally and professionally or externally through legal channels." Victoria's exhale was audible, a long, weary sigh of resignation. She understood the gravity of the situation, the implicit threat of legal action, and the potential fallout for Pinnacle. "How quickly can you be here?" she asked, the urgency in her voice unmistakable. "I'm already on my way." The words, delivered with quiet confidence, were true. My car was already idling, my briefcase packed, my mind already at Pinnacle. The Pinnacle Marketing building rose 43 stories above downtown, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like armor. It was an imposing structure, a testament to the company's power and influence, a symbol of the empire Marcus had so diligently served. I'd been here before, of course, during the original Morrison pitch meetings, back when I'd still been with their previous agency, before Digital Dynamo was even a flicker in my imagination. Back then I'd been junior talent, barely worthy of acknowledgement from executives like Marcus. Today I walked through the lobby with the quiet confidence of someone holding all the cards, a silent promise of the paradigm shift that was about to occur. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting my image, a woman poised, powerful, and ready to reclaim her narrative. Victoria's assistant, a nervous young man named Timothy, met me at the executive elevator. He was fidgeting with his tablet, his eyes wide with thinly veiled anxiety. "Ms. Vance, Ms. Chen is waiting in conference room A with the senior team." As the elevator climbed, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the machinery, Timothy cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. "I should mention," he said quietly, as if sharing a top-secret classified document, "that Mr. Morrison is quite agitated about the situation." "Marcus Morrison?" I clarified, enjoying the delicious irony of sharing a name with my ex-fiancé, his family name now synonymous with the very crisis he had created. "Yes, ma'am," Timothy confirmed, his brow furrowed with concern. "He's threatening to cancel several other contracts if this isn't resolved immediately." The elevator doors opened onto Pinnacle's executive floor, and I could already hear raised voices, a cacophony of frayed nerves and defensive protests, echoing from the end of the hallway. Conference room A's glass walls revealed a scene of barely controlled chaos. Victoria stood at the head of a long, polished conference table, her shoulders set, her expression grim. 6 executives gestured frantically at documents scattered across its surface, their faces a mixture of confusion, frustration, and fear. And then I saw him, Marcus. My Marcus. He sat at the far end of the table, his face pale and sweaty despite the morning hour, his usual swagger replaced by a sickly pallor. When he saw me through the glass, his expression shifted from panic to something approaching pure, unadulterated terror. The man who had boasted of his invincibility, who had dismissed my very existence, was now cowering in his own domain. It was a potent, gratifying sight. The game had truly begun, and I held the winning hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I entered the conference room, the hum of nervous energy palpable. The air crackled with tension. a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere of Friday night. Victoria's voice, though strained, was clear. "Cassandra," she said, her gaze meeting mine, a silent acknowledgement of the weight I carried. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I believe you know most of the team." Nodded politely at faces I recognized from Friday night's party, noting how their expressions ranged from confusion to suspicion. Only Marcus, slumped at the far end of the table, knew exactly why my presence was so profoundly threatening, why his meticulously built empire was on the verge of collapse. He had believed he was above consequences, that his manipulations would never catch up to him. But now the chickens had come home to roost, and I was the one holding the coop door open. "Before we begin," I said, my voice cutting through the strained silence of conference room A. I set my sleek, black briefcase on the polished mahogany table with a soft click, a sound that seemed to echo ominously in the tense air. My movements were deliberate, unhurried, projecting a calm authority that I knew contrasted sharply with the barely concealed panic rippling through the room. I should clarify my position here. My gaze swept across the faces of the assembled executives, lingering for a fraction of a second on Marcus, who seemed to shrink further into his chair, his eyes fixed on me with a desperate, pleading intensity. "Morrison Industries has retained my services to evaluate certain concerns they have about their business relationships. However," I continued, allowing a subtle softening of my tone, a carefully calibrated nuance, "I'm also open to finding solutions that benefit all parties." It was a crucial opening, a diplomatic olive branch extended before the hammer fell. It signaled that I wasn't there purely as an adversary, but as a potential solution, albeit one that would come with significant, and perhaps painful, conditions. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, gestured to an empty chair at the table, inviting me to sit. "Please, Cassandra, we need to understand exactly what Morrison is alleging." I remained standing, a subtle power play that wasn't lost on the room. It conveyed a sense of readiness, of control, a silent assertion that I was here to lead, not merely to participate. "The allegations are quite specific," I began, my voice clear and measured, each word landing with precise impact. "Unauthorized contact with board members, sharing of confidential strategic information, and attempts to undermine existing contracts through what Morrison's legal team is calling, quote, tortious interference." The room erupted in a cacophony of defensive protests. Executives, their faces flushed with a mixture of indignation and fear, began talking over each other, their voices rising in a frantic chorus of denial. "That's impossible," one exclaimed. "Unfounded accusations," cried another. "We would never." The denials were vehement, desperate, a chaotic orchestra of self-preservation. Through the chaos, I watched Marcus. He sank lower in his chair, his silence more telling, more damning, than any of the defensive protests surrounding him. His usual bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the unmistakable pallor of guilt. He knew, they all knew on some level, but his silence confirmed it. "Enough!" Victoria's voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the din, restoring a semblance of order. Her gaze, however, remained fixed on me, a silent plea for clarity. "Cassandra, what evidence are we talking about?" I opened my briefcase, slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. From within, I removed a stack of printed emails, each page meticulously marked with Morrison Industries Legal Department header. Then, a thick file containing transcribed text messages, recorded phone calls, and documented summaries of covert meetings between Pinnacle employees and Morrison board members. Each of these occurred, I explained, my voice devoid of emotion, after Morrison had officially terminated their relationship with your agency. A collective gasp swept through the room, quickly followed by a renewed buzz of whispers. The concrete evidence, laid bare on the table, was irrefutable. It wasn't just hearsay. It was meticulously documented proof of a deliberate, coordinated effort to undermine a former client. "That's not illegal," protested David Kim, Pinnacle's head of client relations, his voice strained, a desperate attempt to find a loophole, a legal technicality. It is, I replied smoothly, meeting his gaze directly. When those communications involve sharing confidential information obtained during the original contract period, information that was then used to attempt to sabotage Morrison's current marketing strategy. The weight of my words settled heavily on the room, silencing even the most vocal objectors. The implication was clear. This wasn't just a breach of contract, it was industrial espionage. Victoria's face had gone ashen, her composure wavering under the weight of the revelations. Her eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, now held a bewildered horror. Who had access to that level of Morrison information? She demanded, her voice barely a whisper. Every eye in the room, as if on cue, turned to Marcus. He was now visibly sweating, a sheen of perspiration forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. He squirmed under their collective gaze, a cornered animal trapped in the harsh glare of judgment. As the former account lead, he would have had complete access to Morrison's strategic plans, budget information, and competitive intelligence. He was the linchpin, the source. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, her voice laced with a dangerous calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. I need you to tell me exactly what communications you've had with Morrison Industries since they terminated our contract. Marcus stammered, his usual confidence completely evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, desperate struggle for words. He was a man drowning, clutching at straws. We were just trying to maintain professional relationships. His voice trailed off, a transparent lie that fooled no one. By sharing their budget projections with their competitors? I interjected, pulling out another document, a forensic accounting report that laid bare the financial trail of his betrayal. Because that's what Morrison's forensic accounting discovered last week. The accusation hit the room like a bomb, shattering any remaining pretense of professional courtesy. Several executives turned to stare at Marcus with expressions of horror and disbelief, their faces contorted with a dawning realization of the catastrophic damage he had inflicted upon the company. This wasn't just Marcus's problem, it was their problem, a corporate cancer that threatened to consume them all. That's impossible, David Kim cried, his voice strained with genuine shock. Marcus wouldn't. Morrison's budget information was leaked to 3 different companies, all of whom subsequently underbid them on major contracts, I continued, my voice unwavering, detailing the precise financial damage. The information could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of their financial strategy. I met Victoria's gaze, a silent confirmation of the undeniable truth. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulous, and damning. There was no escaping it. Victoria's voice was dangerously quiet, a tremor of fury beneath its controlled surface. Marcus, stand up. Marcus rose on unsteady legs, looking like a man facing execution. His expensive suit, which had seemed so imposing moments ago, now hung on his trembling frame like a shroud. He was a ghost of his former self, stripped bare of his arrogance and hubris. Clean out your office, Victoria commanded, her voice now firm, resolute, devoid of any lingering doubt. Security will escort you out. You're terminated immediately, and our legal team will be in contact about potential criminal charges. Victoria, you can't, Marcus began, a pathetic plea. I can and I am. Get out of my building. As if summoned by magic, 2 burly security guards appeared, flanking Marcus as he stumbled toward the door. The sight of him, escorted out of the very building he had once lorded over, was a potent symbol of his swift and brutal downfall. As he passed my chair, he stopped, turning to me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, his eyes blazing with a venomous fury. This is your doing, he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with rage. You planned this. No, Marcus, I replied calmly, my voice soft, almost sympathetic, yet laced with an unyielding finality. You planned this when you decided to commit corporate espionage. I just documented it. I met his hateful gaze, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. The truth, stark and undeniable, hung in the air between us. As the guards escorted him away, his pathetic protests fading down the hallway, the remaining executives sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and dawning fear. The man they'd celebrated with just 3 days ago had been revealed as a corporate criminal. And everyone in the room was silently calculating how much damage he might have done to their own careers, how far the fallout would spread. The air, once thick with tension, now felt heavy with the lingering scent of betrayal. The silence after Marcus's departure was profound, almost reverent. It was the silence of a bomb having just exploded, the echo of the blast still vibrating in the air. The executives, previously so vocal in their denials, now sat stiffly, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a fundamental breach of trust, a deep-seated corruption that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Pinnacle Marketing. Victoria, her initial horror slowly giving way to a steely resolve, was the first to break the stillness. "Cassandra," she said, her voice still quiet but firm. "I need to know. How much of this does Morrison want to pursue legally?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the pivot point that would determine not only Pinnacle's immediate future, but also my strategic role within it. The question that would determine whether I became Pinnacle's savior or their destroyer. "That depends on several factors," I said, finally taking the offered seat, my movements calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. The subtle power play was complete. I was no longer an outsider observer, but an integral part of the solution. Morrison's primary concern isn't revenge. It's ensuring this never happens again. They need confidence that any future business relationship with Pinnacle will be handled with absolute integrity. David Kim, who had been vehemently denying Marcus's involvement moments ago, now looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Future business relationship? Morrison is considering giving Pinnacle another chance?" His voice was thin, almost disbelieving. "Morrison is considering it," I explained, my gaze meeting his. "But only under very specific conditions." I paused, allowing the weight of those conditions to sink in. This wasn't a handout, it was a stringent demand for radical change. Victoria leaned forward, her expression intense. "What conditions?" "First, complete transparency about the extent of Marcus's misconduct," I began, enumerating the terms with a calm precision. "Morrison's legal team wants a full forensic audit of all communications and file access during the past 6 months. Heads nodded around the table. It was a reasonable request, a necessary first step towards rebuilding trust, though it would undoubtedly be expensive and time-consuming, uncovering every hidden secret. Second, I continued, Morrison wants oversight of any future Pinnacle campaigns. Specifically, they want an independent consultant to review all strategic decisions and ensure compliance with confidentiality agreements. A murmur went through the room. This was a significant concession, a direct challenge to their internal autonomy. It implied a deep distrust, a need for an external guardian. "And third?" Victoria asked, though her expression suggested she already knew where this was heading, her eyes fixed on mine with a knowing intensity. "Morrison has specifically requested that I serve as that oversight consultant," I stated, allowing the full impact of the words to resonate. "They trust my work, and they believe I have the expertise to prevent future irregularities." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. I wasn't just offering to clean up Marcus's mess. I was positioning myself as Pinnacle's watchdog, their internal auditor, with direct access to their operations and decision-making processes. It was an unprecedented level of control for an external entity, a complete reversal of the typical client-agency dynamic. "This is unprecedented," David protested, his voice sharp with alarm. "Having an external consultant with that level of access is exactly what Morrison is demanding as a condition of not pursuing criminal charges," I interrupted, my voice firm. There was no room for negotiation on this point. They're also prepared to restore their original contract value, which I believe was worth approximately $12 million annually. That number focused everyone's attention immediately. $12 million was serious money, even for an agency of Pinnacle's size. It was a powerful incentive, a lifeline thrown to a drowning company. The financial implications were too significant to ignore. The tension in the room shifted from fear of exposure to a desperate hunger for opportunity. Victoria studied my face carefully, her gaze piercing, as if trying to discern my true motivations. "And if we agree to these conditions, Morrison will drop all legal action, restore their contract, and consider expanding their relationship with Pinnacle for future projects?" she summarized, her voice tinged with a cautious optimism. "Precisely," I affirmed. I paused for effect, allowing the magnitude of the offer to sink in. "However, they need a decision today. Their board meets tomorrow morning, and they want this resolved before then." The time pressure was deliberate, a strategic maneuver. By forcing a quick decision, I was preventing Pinnacle's executives from finding alternatives or developing counter-strategies. I was boxing them in, leaving them with only one viable option. "I need to discuss this with our board," Victoria said, her gaze fixed on the clock on the wall, a silent acknowledgement of the ticking deadline. "Of course. Morrison understands you need an hour to deliberate." Victoria blinked, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "An hour? Their legal team is prepared to file charges this afternoon if they don't have a resolution by noon," I said, checking my watch, a theatrical gesture that underscored the urgency. "It's currently 10:30. The room erupted in frantic whispers as executives realized they were being cornered, their options dwindling with every passing minute. But I also saw calculation in Victoria's eyes. She was smart enough to recognize that my offer, while aggressive, was actually quite generous, considering the criminal exposure Marcus had created. It was a bitter pill, but it offered a path to survival. "Cassandra," Victoria said slowly, her voice betraying a hint of reluctant admiration, "assuming we agree to these terms, what exactly would your role entail?" "I would serve as Morrison's liaison with Pinnacle, overseeing strategic development and ensuring compliance with confidentiality protocols," I explained, outlining the parameters of my unprecedented access. "Essentially, I'd be guaranteeing that Morrison gets the level of service they originally contracted for, and that their confidential information remains secure." "And how long would this arrangement last?" David Kim asked, his voice still tinged with suspicion, his fingers already frantically calculating on his tablet. "Morrison is suggesting a 12-month trial period, with options to extend based on performance. That would give you access to all our major accounts, not just Morrison," David pointed out, his voice sharp with concern. The implication was clear. I would be privy to Pinnacle's deepest secrets, their entire client roster, their operational strategies. Only as necessary to ensure proper service delivery for Morrison and to address any lingering concerns related to Marcus's misconduct, I replied diplomatically. But everyone in the room understood the reality. I was asking for unprecedented access to Pinnacle's operations, essentially positioning myself as an external executive with significant oversight authority. It was a bold demand, a testament to my newfound power. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it, and her face paled, a subtle shift that caught everyone's attention. "What is it?" David asked, his voice laced with a renewed sense of dread. "Morrison's CEO is downstairs in our lobby," Victoria said quietly, her eyes wide with alarm. "He wants to speak with whoever's in charge of resolving this situation." The pressure had just intensified dramatically. Morrison wasn't just demanding answers. They were bringing their demands directly to Pinnacle's doorstep, a clear sign of their unwavering resolve and the severity of the crisis. It was a power move designed to force an immediate decision, leaving Pinnacle no room to maneuver. "Should I bring him up?" Timothy asked from the corner where he'd been silently observing the entire exchange, his eyes darting between Victoria and me, trying to gauge the appropriate response. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice firm, then turned back to me, her gaze piercing. "Cassandra, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you doing this to help Morrison, or to destroy us?" The question was fair, and everyone in the room, holding their breath, was waiting for my answer. My response, I knew, would define not only my intentions, but also the very nature of this delicate negotiation. "I'm doing this to solve a problem," I said finally, my voice calm and unwavering. Marcus created a situation that threatens both Morrison's interests and Pinnacle's reputation. My proposal addresses both concerns, while creating a framework for moving forward. Professionally, it was the truth, unvarnished and direct. My motivations had evolved beyond personal satisfaction. They were now rooted in a commitment to integrity and strategic rebuilding. Even though Marcus was your... David began, then stopped abruptly as Victoria shot him a warning look. A sharp, silent command to hold his tongue. He had almost blurted out the connection, the personal history that Marcus was so desperate to conceal. Marcus was what? I asked innocently, though I already knew exactly what he was about to say. The secret, the personal connection, was dangerously close to being exposed. Nothing, Victoria said quickly, her gaze firm on David. David, please escort Mr. Thompson up here. Everyone else, we need to make a decision in the next 15 minutes. As the room cleared for private deliberation, executives scrambling out with a renewed sense of urgency, Victoria and I were left alone, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. The stage was set for a more intimate, more revealing confrontation. Victoria walked to the panoramic windows, her back to me, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The morning sun, previously a symbol of Pinnacle's power, now seemed to cast a harsh, unforgiving light on the unfolding crisis. "You know, don't you?" she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, still facing the window. "Know what?" I prompted, my voice calm, allowing her to articulate the unspoken truth. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, a glimmer of suspicion and curiosity in their depths. "That Marcus was more than just a colleague to you. It was a challenge, a test of my composure, of my integrity." I met her gaze steadily, unflinching. "My personal history doesn't change the professional reality of what he did." "Doesn't it?" she retorted, a hint of accusation in her tone. "Because from where I'm sitting, Cassandra, this looks like an incredibly sophisticated revenge plot. The accusation hung between us like a challenge, a direct confrontation. Victoria was testing me, pushing me, trying to determine whether my motivations were purely personal or truly professional. She needed to know if she was dealing with a vengeful ex-girlfriend or a strategic partner." "Victoria," I said calmly, maintaining eye contact, allowing no flicker of emotion to betray my true feelings. "If I wanted revenge on Marcus, I could have destroyed him months ago. I've had documentation of his questionable practices since before Morrison terminated their original contract. If this were about revenge, I wouldn't be offering Pinnacle a way to survive it. I would have exposed him publicly, ensured his complete and utter ruin without offering any lifeline." She considered this, her gaze unwavering, then nodded slowly, a subtle acknowledgement of the logic in my statement. "So what is it about?" she asked, her voice softer now, less accusatory, more genuinely curious. "It's about proving that success isn't about who you can manipulate or whose ideas you can steal," I explained, the words echoing the very lessons Marcus had never learned, the principles he'd mocked when I'd tried to build something meaningful. "It's about actual competence, delivered consistently, with integrity." I paused, letting the words resonate, letting her absorb their full meaning. These are the principles Marcus dismissed as naive idealism, but they are the foundation of true, sustainable success. "And you think you can provide that competence?" she asked, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, a hint of admiration. "I know I can. The question is whether Pinnacle is ready to earn back the trust Marcus destroyed." Victoria's smile broadened, a genuine, wry amusement. "You know, Cassandra, if you'd pitched this to me 6 months ago as a business merger, I might have said yes immediately." She shook her head slightly. "But now I'm not sure if you're my salvation or my biggest threat." The playful jab was a sign that our conversation had shifted, that she was beginning to see me not just as a problem solver, but as a formidable force. A necessary evil, perhaps, but a force nonetheless. Before I could respond, the conference room door opened, and Timothy ushered in Mr. Thompson, Morrison Industries CEO, a stern-faced man in his 60s who commanded immediate attention. He strode in, his presence filling the room, his gaze sweeping over Victoria and me, his expression unyielding. "Miss Chen," he said without preamble, his voice firm, authoritative. "I understand you have a proposal for resolving this unfortunate situation." Victoria glanced at me, a quick, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, then turned back to Mr. Thompson. "We do. Cassandra Vance has outlined a framework that we believe addresses your concerns while allowing us to rebuild our professional relationship." She ceded the floor to me with an unspoken gesture, a clear sign of my pivotal role. Mr. Thompson's eyes, sharp and assessing, found mine. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice direct, piercing, "I've reviewed your work extensively. My question is simple. Can you guarantee that Pinnacle will never again breach our confidentiality with the oversight structure we've discussed?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation, my voice unwavering. "But only if Pinnacle agrees to full transparency and accountability." It was a non-negotiable condition, the cornerstone of the new paradigm I was establishing. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Then he turned back to Victoria. "Miss Chen, do you accept Ms. Vance's terms?" The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, humming with unspoken tension. Victoria was being asked to hand significant control to an outsider, to admit that her own team couldn't be trusted, and to essentially submit to my oversight. But she was also being offered $12 million in restored revenue and protection from crippling criminal prosecution. The choice, though difficult, was clear. "We accept," she said quietly, her voice a low, firm assent, a testament to her strategic acumen and her commitment to Pinnacle's survival. Mr. Thompson smiled, for the first time since entering the room. It was a small, tight smile, but it radiated a quiet satisfaction. "Excellent. Ms. Vance, I'll expect your first oversight report by Friday." As he left, his footsteps echoing in the silence, Victoria and I sat in the empty conference room, processing what had just occurred, the magnitude of the shift that had just taken place. "So," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Finally. When do you start?" "I already have." The words hung in the air, a declaration of a new beginning, a new era for Pinnacle Marketing, an era I would personally usher in. The weight of the moment, the immense responsibility, settled upon me, but it was a weight I welcomed. The battle had been won, but the war, against entrenched corruption and old ways of thinking, was just beginning, and I was ready for it. The confidence that radiated from me was not just about professional triumph, but about the deep satisfaction of seeing integrity prevail. The executive suite on Pinnacle's 38th floor had been Marcus's domain for exactly 18 months. It was a space designed to project power and exclusivity, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the downtown skyline. By Wednesday morning, it was mine. Victoria had insisted on the symbolism, a clear, unspoken message to everyone about the new power structure at Pinnacle. Placing me in the office of the man I'd exposed was a bold move, a statement of intent that rippled through the corporate hierarchy like a shockwave. I walked into the office, the thick carpet muffling my footsteps, the air still faintly imbued with the lingering scent of Marcus's expensive cologne. It felt like stepping onto a stage, the curtains just drawn back. Standing at the expansive windows, I surveyed the city below, the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers a stark contrast to the quiet resolve I felt within. My assistant from Digital Dynamo, Jamie, was already there, coordinating the installation of secure communication equipment. Her usual cheerful demeanor, tempered by a newfound professionalism befitting our new high-stakes environment. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now occupied the corner office Marcus had described in meticulous detail during countless dinners. The very space he'd claimed represented his inevitable solitary rise to the top. He had envisioned himself as an unassailable emperor, and I, his discarded empress, was now sitting on his throne. "Cassandra," Jamie said, hanging up her phone, a flicker of concern in her voice that immediately caught my attention. The subtle shift in her tone was enough to signal trouble. "We have a problem brewing downstairs." I turned from the window, my gaze sharp. "What kind of problem?" 3 of Marcus's former team members requested a meeting with Victoria this morning, she explained, her fingers hovering over her tablet screen, ready to pull up any necessary information. Apparently they're questioning the legitimacy of your appointment and threatening to go to the board of directors. This was expected. Predictable even. Marcus had been a master of cultivating loyalty, not through genuine respect or ethical leadership, but through a dangerous combination of shared profits and mutual complicity. His inner circle, those who had benefited most directly from his illicit schemes, would naturally resist my oversight, especially once they realized I had immediate access to all their communications and project files. They feared exposure, and rightly so. They knew their own hands weren't clean. Kratra? Who specifically? I asked, pulling up Pinnacle's organizational chart on my own tablet, already anticipating the names. My weekend deep dive hadn't just been about Morrison Industries. It had been a comprehensive audit of Marcus's entire department, scrutinizing key personnel and their past projects. Sandra Walsh, the creative director, Tom Berkshire from account management, and Lisa Hang, the strategy lead. Jamie rattled off the names. According to Victoria's assistant, they've been meeting privately since Monday afternoon, ever since Marcus's departure. I studied their personnel files, noting patterns I'd already identified during my weekend research. Sandra, the self-proclaimed creative genius, had a history of taking credit for junior staff's ideas, a practice Marcus had implicitly endorsed, if not actively encouraged. Tom, the smooth-talking account manager, had been padding expense reports for client entertainment, a seemingly minor infraction that often masked deeper financial irregularities. And Lisa, the quiet, observant strategy lead, had been sharing competitive intelligence with her boyfriend, who worked at a rival agency, a direct breach of confidentiality that screamed of Marcus's influence. They were a microcosm of the corruption he had fostered, a reflection of his own dishonest practices. Schedule individual meetings with each of them for this afternoon, I instructed, my voice calm, resolute. 30 minutes each, starting with Sandra. Jamie raised an eyebrow, a silent question in her eyes. Together they might feel empowered, she mused, understanding the dynamic. Separately, they'll be vulnerable. Exactly, I affirmed. And Jamie, make sure each meeting is recorded. With their consent, of course. The "of course" was a crucial detail, a legal formality that added a veneer of legitimacy to what was, in essence, an interrogation. I wanted everything documented, every word, every hesitation. The morning was spent meticulously reviewing the forensic audit results that had been delivered at dawn. My team had been working tirelessly, following every digital breadcrumb. Marcus's misconduct, it turned out, was even more extensive, more chilling, than I'd initially revealed to Victoria. Beyond the blatant Morrison Industries breach, he'd been systematically stealing strategic plans from Pinnacle's other high-profile clients and selling them to competitors through a complex network of offshore shell companies. The evidence was damning. Encrypted communications, a labyrinthine paper trail that connected him to at least 8 different incidents of corporate espionage over the past 2 years, millions funneled through illicit channels. Marcus hadn't just been unethical. He'd been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise from inside Pinnacle's corporate structure, using the company as his personal piggy bank and intelligence agency. Victoria appeared in my doorway at 11:30, looking haggard despite her immaculate suit. The stress of the past few days etched onto her face. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper, her usual vibrant energy dimmed. The board emergency meeting is set for Friday, she stated, her voice tight. They want a full briefing on the extent of the damage. They'll have it, I assured her, gesturing to a stack of meticulously organized evidence files on my desk. Each file represented another layer of Marcus's deceit, another betrayal of trust. Though I should warn you, the scope is larger than we initially discussed. She sat heavily in one of the plush leather chairs facing my desk, her gaze fixed on the burgeoning piles of incriminating documents. How much larger? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus wasn't just stealing from Morrison. He was operating a systematic intelligence-selling operation that compromised at least 15 of your major clients over the past 2 years. Victoria's face drained of color, turning a ghostly white. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror. 15, Cassandra? That's nearly half our client base. The enormity of the betrayal, the scale of the damage was beginning to sink in. I know, I replied, my voice solemn, acknowledging the devastating impact. But here's the important part. None of those clients know yet. Marcus was careful to make his breaches look like normal competitive intelligence gathering, a plausible deniability woven into his scheme. This was the crucial window of opportunity. If we acted quickly and transparently, we could potentially mitigate the fallout. Yet, I continued, my voice grave, the evidence suggests that Marcus's network is still active. He may have partners inside Pinnacle who are continuing his operations. This was the hook I'd been preparing since Monday. By suggesting that Marcus's corruption was ongoing, that the threat hadn't been entirely removed with his termination, I created a compelling justification for expanding my oversight beyond just the Morrison account, cementing my indispensable role. Who? Victoria asked, her voice sharp, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer, her mind racing through the potential culprits. That's what this afternoon's meetings are designed to determine, I stated, a subtle nod to the impending interrogations. The net was closing in. Before Victoria could respond, my secure phone rang, its unique tone indicating a call from the Morrison Industries CEO, Mr. Thompson. I answered immediately. Cassandra, I hope I'm not interrupting. Mr. Thompson's voice carried the satisfaction of a man whose problems were being efficiently solved, a subtle note of relief. It was my pleasure, Mr. Thompson, I replied, allowing a polite warmth to enter my tone. I trust the transition is proceeding smoothly? Better than expected, in fact. That's why I'm calling. Morrison Industries would like to expand our relationship with Pinnacle, but only under your direct oversight. Victoria leaned forward, clearly interested in this unexpected development, her eyes gleaming with a renewed sense of hope. The severity of the crisis was still present, but this was a significant, positive shift. We're planning a major product launch next quarter, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice infused with excitement. Our biggest in 5 years. The campaign budget is approximately $30 million, and we want Pinnacle to handle it exclusively. $30 million. The number hung in the air like a golden carrot, a shimmering beacon of opportunity. That single campaign would represent nearly a quarter of Pinnacle's annual revenue, a massive injection of funds that could stabilize the company and signal its return to prominence. It was a testament to the trust I had managed to rebuild in a mere 72 hours. Of course, we'll need guarantees about information security and strategic integrity, Mr. Thompson added, his tone firm. Which is why we're insisting that you personally manage the account relationship. I'd be honored, I replied, my gaze meeting Victoria's, watching her eyes widen at the implications. This wasn't just about my role as a consultant. It was about me becoming the linchpin, the indispensable guardian of Pinnacle's most valuable assets. The power shift was palpable. After ending the call, Victoria and I sat in silence for several moments, the weight of the $30 million opportunity settling between us. $30 million, she said finally, her voice hushed, almost reverent. Contingent on my direct involvement, I noted, reiterating the key stipulation. Morrison doesn't trust Pinnacle's internal processes after Marcus's betrayal. So essentially, Victoria concluded, a wry smile touching her lips, you're becoming indispensable to our largest client relationship. I'm becoming the guarantee of Pinnacle's integrity, I corrected diplomatically, choosing my words carefully. It wasn't about my indispensability alone, but about the values I embodied and brought to the table. Victoria's smile was knowing, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Cassandra, you realize what you've done, don't you? In 3 days, you've gone from external consultant to the person who controls our most valuable accounts. The observation was accurate, but incomplete. I wasn't just controlling accounts. I was systematically positioning myself as Pinnacle's most critical asset, while simultaneously dismantling the network Marcus had built around himself, piece by agonizing piece. At 1 p.m., Sandra Walsh entered my office, radiating the aggressive confidence of someone who'd spent 2 years as Marcus's right-hand woman. Her designer blazer and expensive handbag bespoke a lifestyle perhaps subsidized by the very profits she'd skimmed from creative campaigns she'd never actually conceived. She carried herself with an air of entitlement, a subtle sneer playing on her lips, as if my presence were an unfortunate, temporary inconvenience. Cassandra, she began without preamble, Her voice clipped, barely concealing her disdain. "I think we need to establish some boundaries about your role here. My team is highly effective, and we don't appreciate external interference." "Please sit," I said, my voice calm even as I subtly activated the recording system on my tablet with Sandra's visible consent. I wanted this conversation documented, every nuance captured. "I'm interested in your perspective." Sandra remained standing, clearly intending to dominate the conversation, to assert her territorial claim. "My perspective is that Pinnacle's creative department has functioned perfectly well without external oversight. Marcus trusted my judgment completely." Her emphasis on Marcus's name was a deliberate challenge, an attempt to leverage his absent authority. "Marcus is no longer with the company," I reminded her gently, the words a subtle jab. "Because you orchestrated his termination." Sandra shot back, her composure cracking, her face flushing with indignation. "Everyone knows you had some kind of personal relationship with him. This is a vendetta." This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Sandra's mention of my relationship with Marcus provided the perfect segue into more sensitive topics, into the very heart of the corruption I intended to expose. "Actually, Sandra, I'm glad you brought up personal relationships and professional conduct," I said, maintaining my calm, even tone. I opened a file on my desk, deliberately turning my screen away from her, building the suspense. "I've been reviewing some concerning patterns in the creative department." Her confidence wavered slightly, the aggressive posture stiffening. "What kind of patterns?" she asked, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Well, for instance, the Morrison Industries rebranding campaign that won 3 industry awards last year," I began, my voice methodical, revealing the meticulous research I had done. "The original concept was developed by your junior associate, Rebecca Torres, but the credit and bonus went to you." Sandra's face flushed, a mottled red spreading across her cheeks. "That's not true. I supervised that project." "I have Rebecca's original presentation files," I countered, turning my laptop screen toward her, displaying the damning evidence. The timestamp was clear, 3 weeks before Sandra's version was submitted to Marcus. "Would you like to review the side-by-side comparison?" The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Rebecca's presentation contained detailed conceptual frameworks and design elements that appeared, almost verbatim, in Sandra's final submission, with only minor, superficial modifications. "Even if that were true," Sandra said weakly, her voice thin, her bravado rapidly dissolving, "supervisors routinely refine their team's work." "True," I conceded, acknowledging the standard practice. "But supervisors don't usually claim individual credit for team innovations, especially when those innovations generate significant personal bonuses." I opened another file, a silent threat. The Chen Electronics campaign, the Peterson Financial rebrand, the Taylor Industries launch. "Should I continue, Sandra?" Sandra slumped into the chair she'd refused moments earlier, her shoulders slumping, her facade crumbling completely. The fight had gone out of her. "What do you want?" she mumbled, defeat evident in her voice. "I want to understand how systemic this problem is," I replied, my voice firm. "Because Morrison Industries' new $30 million campaign requires absolute creative integrity." The number hit its mark, a powerful reminder of the financial stakes. Sandra understood that her future income, her very career at Pinnacle, depended on maintaining Morrison's confidence, which now irrevocably required my approval. "Cassandra, I can explain," she began, a desperate plea. "I'm sure you can, but first, I need you to help me understand Marcus's creative review process. Did he know about your collaborative approach with junior staff ideas?" This was the crucial question, the strategic pivot. If Sandra implicated Marcus in the credit-stealing scheme, it would provide additional evidence of his systematic corruption, demonstrating that he had not only tolerated but potentially encouraged such behavior. "Marcus didn't care about the details," Sandra said carefully, her words guarded, betraying her fear. She was trapped, realizing that any answer would either incriminate herself, or Marcus, or both. He just wanted results, even if those results involved taking credit for other people's work. Sandra looked trapped, caught between a rock and a hard place. "I think," I said gently, my voice still even, almost compassionate, It would be best if you took some time to reflect on how creative processes should work moving forward. Why don't you take the rest of the week off? Paid, of course. The dismissal was polite, yet utterly unmistakable. Sandra gathered her expensive purse and left without another word, her shoulders slumped, understanding that her career at Pinnacle now depended entirely on my mercy, on my assessment of her willingness to cooperate. Tom Berkshire's meeting at 2:30 followed a similar, predictable pattern. The account management director, a jovial man whose hearty laugh had once disguised his deceit, had been inflating client entertainment expenses and pocketing the difference, a scheme that Marcus had not only known about Pakamavili but had been taking a percentage of her mercy. The sheer brazenness of it was astounding. Tom, I said, reviewing his expense reports, the numbers glaringly inconsistent with industry norms. I'm curious about the Morrison Industries account dinners from last spring. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by nervous fidgeting. What about them? He mumbled, his gaze avoiding mine. Well, according to your receipts, you took Morrison's marketing team to Le Bernardin 3 times in 1 month, spending approximately $2,000 per dinner. I paused, letting the absurdity of it hang in the air. Morrison appreciated fine dining, he said defensively, a weak attempt at justification. I'm sure they did. But Morrison's marketing team was actually in Japan for most of that month, launching their Asian expansion. Tom's face went white as he realized his fabrication had been exposed. The detailed travel itineraries, easily cross-referenced, made his lies pathetically obvious. So I'm wondering, I continued, my voice unwavering, who you were actually entertaining at Le Bernardin, and why Pinnacle's clients were paying for it. The investigation revealed that Tom had been using client entertainment budgets not for clients, but to wine and dine potential clients from competitor agencies, essentially using Pinnacle's money to build his own future career opportunities outside the company. It was a blatant conflict of interest, a direct betrayal. Marcus approved all my expenses, Tom said desperately, his voice cracking, a pathetic attempt to shift blame. I know he did, I replied, my voice still calm, which raises interesting questions about Marcus's oversight responsibilities. By 3:30, Tom had also been sent home on paid administrative leave, pending further investigation. His departure was less defiant, more resigned, a man caught in the very web of deceit he had helped to weave. Lisa Hang's 3 p.m. meeting was the most revealing, confirming the deeper systemic rot I suspected. As strategy lead, she'd had access to competitive intelligence from multiple clients, sensitive information she'd been systematically sharing with her boyfriend, Trevor Walsh, who worked at rival agency Crawford & Associates. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Lisa, I said, pulling up encrypted message logs that our IT forensics team had painstakingly recovered from her work devices. The sheer volume of communication was staggering. I need to ask you about your communications with Trevor Walsh at Crawford. Her composure cracked immediately, like a fragile glass shattering. Her usually calm, analytical gaze darted around the room, desperate for an escape. How did you? She stammered, her voice barely audible. How did I access communications that you thought were secure? I finished for her, my voice gentle, almost empathetic. The same way I discovered Marcus's offshore accounts and Sandra's credit theft. Our forensic team is thorough, Lisa. The question isn't whether you've been sharing confidential information. The question is whether you're willing to cooperate with our investigation. The message logs were damning. Lisa had been providing Crawford with detailed strategic plans for Pinnacle's major campaigns, allowing them to underbid on several contracts and steal at least 4 significant clients. Marcus knew about Trevor, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate admission. He said it was good to have informal intelligence sources at other agencies. So Marcus not only knew about your relationship with a competitor's employee, but he encouraged you to maintain that relationship? I pressed, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This was the final piece of evidence I needed, the smoking gun that solidified the systemic nature of the corruption. He said everyone in the industry has back-channel communications, Lisa confessed, her voice thick with shame and fear. He told me it was how we stayed ahead. This was it. Marcus hadn't just been running his own criminal enterprise. He'd been actively encouraging his team to engage in similar activities, creating a culture of systematic corruption throughout his department, normalizing unethical behavior as standard practice. He'd built a web of deceit, trapping others in his schemes. By 4 p.m., I'd sent Lisa home as well, with instructions to retain legal counsel for the inevitable criminal investigation that would likely follow. Her situation was perhaps the most serious, as it involved direct, actionable espionage. Victoria appeared in my doorway as I was organizing the afternoon's evidence files, her expression grim, a weary sigh escaping her lips. The sight of the 3 empty offices, each door ajar, told its own story. "All 3 of them?" she asked, her voice hushed, a mix of disbelief and resignation. "All 3 of them," I confirmed, pushing the stacks of incriminating documents across my desk. "And Victoria, the corruption goes deeper than we thought." Marcus wasn't just a rogue employee. He was running a systematic operation with multiple participants, a full-blown criminal enterprise. I handed her the evidence files from each meeting. Sandra's stolen creative concepts, Tom's embezzled funds disguised as expenses, and Lisa's brazen act of selling strategic intelligence to competitors. Victoria's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the documentation, her eyes scanning the damning details. The sheer scale of the betrayal, the audacity of the schemes, was clearly shocking her. "The board meeting on Friday," she said finally, her voice strained. "They're going to want to know how this happened. It happened because Marcus created a culture where corruption was normalized, and ethical employees were either marginalized or driven out," I replied, my voice firm, laying bare the brutal truth. "But the good news is that we can rebuild, with proper oversight." "Rebuild how?" "You've just eliminated half my senior staff." Victoria's voice held a note of genuine concern, a fear of the void left by such a drastic purge. "Half your corrupt senior staff," I corrected, my gaze unwavering. "The other half, the ones who were actually doing their jobs with integrity, who were being overshadowed and stifled, are still here." I pulled up another file on my laptop, a meticulously prepared document outlining my proposed restructuring. In fact, I've identified several mid-level employees who should be promoted immediately. Rebecca Torres, for instance, the creative associate whose ideas Sandra was stealing, has more genuine talent than Sandra ever had. She's been doing award-winning work for months, only for someone else to claim the glory. Victoria studied the promotion recommendations I'd prepared, her expression shifting from grimness to a flicker of hope. "You've been busy," she murmured, a hint of admiration returning to her voice. "I've been thorough. By Friday's board meeting, I'll have a complete restructuring plan that eliminates the corruption while strengthening Pinnacle's creative and strategic capabilities. And," I added, my voice imbued with quiet confidence, "maintains Morrison's $30 million contract. And," Victoria finished, a knowing look in her eye, "positions Pinnacle to compete for similar large-scale campaigns from other clients who demand the same level of integrity Morrison expects." The implications were clear. This wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation, about setting a new industry standard. As evening approached, I stood again at the windows of what had been Marcus's office, watching the city lights begin to twinkle below, a vast tapestry of ambition and opportunity. In 3 days, I'd exposed a criminal network, eliminated corrupt leadership, and positioned myself as the indispensable guardian of Pinnacle's integrity. But more importantly, I'd proven that success wasn't about manipulation or theft or riding on others' coattails. It was about actual competence, delivered consistently, with uncompromising ethics. Marcus had said I'd never succeed without him. Looking out over the city from his former office, managing his former clients, and rebuilding his former department, I smiled at the memory. He'd been right about one thing. I would never succeed the way he had, through lies and theft and betrayal. I was succeeding in a way he could never understand, through merit, integrity, and the simple revolutionary concept of actually earning what I achieved. Friday's board meeting would make it official, but the transformation was already complete. Pinnacle Marketing was no longer Marcus's corrupt kingdom. It was becoming something better, something worthy of the trust Morrison Industries had placed in my hands. And this, I knew, was only the beginning. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's construction so complete and successful that the original corruption becomes utterly irrelevant, forcing those who once underestimated you into a fate they could never have imagined. Marcus had said I'd never succeed without him. Standing there, observing him working for my intern, I knew he'd been absolutely right. I could never have succeeded the way he did, through theft, manipulation, and betrayal. But I had succeeded in a way he never could have imagined, by proving that integrity wasn't a limitation on achievement, but the very foundation for sustainable excellence. He who thought he was essential was now utterly dispensable, taking orders from the new generation of leaders, molded by the very principles he scorned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.